This is me. My whole life I've always been a gamer, but what's always piqued my interest the most was the creation behind the game I was playing. Something about producing a single unified piece just sparked my curiosity. So I became a game developer. Whether it was the water or the art style and lighting, I always loved seeing how everything worked and came together, so I wanted in on the creation behind it all. There's just one problem. I don't got the nearest clue on what it takes to make a game. That shouldn't be too much of an issue though, right? Join me today on my ongoing adventure of becoming a game developer. Everybody has to start somewhere, and I believe the best way to start is to figure out which engine I'm using. Godot appears to be the best game engine on the market for what I'm attempting to achieve, so I doubled down on it. Godot is notorious for its exclusive programming language. Although the engine understands more popular languages, the most widely supported one by far is its very own GD script. Luckily, multiple tutorials have been made to teach others the ropes. Despite some of the more popular tutorials, I settled on these two videos created by the channel Godot. These videos explain the basics, which is all I really need prior to figuring things out on my own. Now it's time for the interesting part, creating my first game. I went into this without any sort of plan, especially since I'm fresh out of the gate of Tutorial Island. I started with a simple button. I also made a global script to manage the player's stats. I made a simple variable, coins, and connected that to another script that's attached to the button. Just by connecting these two, I already have a working function. Next, I made a text label and applied the variable so that you can see how many coins you have. And boom, there we have it, our first game, a clicking simulator. I made this completely by accident while figuring out how things work, but I think this is a good direction for where I want to go. So let's keep working on it. Some basic parts of a clicking sim would of course be the clicking, but also a shop. I got quick to work to create a button that has the opposite effect of the click button. This button subtracts the score. When purchasing something in a video game, you need to be making some sort of benefit from the purchase. The plan was to create a multiplier for the click button, but since I didn't want to dabble into multiplication just yet, I decided to make a separate score and called it seeds. I completely forgot where this came from. Anyways, this button now not only subtracts from the coin score, but also adds to the seed score. Duplicating my text label, you can now see how many seeds and coins you have at one time, but what's the point if nothing saves? Here's the first tricky part, saving data. Luckily for me, Godot makes this process lightweight. All I really needed to do was create a button that once pressed will save the global score to a file on the computer of the person playing. I then made an opposite effect that pulls data out to load what was there before. This means you can quit the game, come back a week later, and have all your progress still there. This is a big win for the project, but now would be a good time to take a break. We're back for day 2, and I think I might have a case of GameDev syndrome. All I really wanted to do was continue working on the project, but Google says otherwise. Today I spent some time stylizing my creation. I'm not the most artistic person around, especially since I lack the proper tools for creating art, textures, and music. These are some pretty important requirements for a functioning video game. Fortunately, there are royalty-free websites that provide all of the above already made by other people for the purpose of sharing. The two websites I use the most are Google Fonts and OpenGameArt. These provide all sorts of fonts, icons, textures, and music for free use in any project. I took the fluffiest font I could find and applied that to the text in my game. I also added some background music and sound effects. These are the absolute basics, but they still made a pretty big difference. Next on my to-do list would be to make a main menu. I already had my game scene, which means when you start the project, you hop immediately into the game. This is not what we want, so I made a new one that contains 3 buttons: a play, options, and quit. These are pretty self-explanatory. All I needed to do was add a script that switches the scene when the play button is clicked. I also made the project close when quit is pressed and options switch to an options scene when clicked. I also quickly added a menu button to the game scene so you can return back to the main menu. I spiced up the menu with some music and a wood texture in the background. At the start of day 3, I got distracted with something I'd wanted to see was doable. Basically, when you hover over a button, text would show up telling you what it is. I used an icon from Google Fonts and added mouse entered and exited functions. When the mouse enters the image, text would be made visible describing what the seeds were. When it exited, the text would disappear. I also duplicated the seed shop and info button and made a pet shop. You'll notice the screen is starting to get a bit full, so it may be time for a redesign. Not before changing up some quick settings, of course. I changed the window settings so that the text and buttons would always be visible. It's not perfect, but it's a start to something. I also made the project full screen when opened, so it retained the look I was going for. Another thing I wanted to fix was the Godot splash screen, but since I don't really have any other image in mind right now, I decided to just remove it. One thing I wanted to accomplish was a button overhaul. There's just one mistake that I made. When creating the buttons, I used normal buttons. There's a variant called texture buttons, which are the same thing, but now you can apply texture to it. That means if I wanted these buttons to look a bit nicer, I was gonna need to remake them all. At least, I think so. I'm not yet aware of any other way of going about this, so I decided to work primarily on the main menu, since it had the least amount of code to transfer. After a bit of trial and error though, I decided to give up. I got it to work, but something about it just didn't look right. Guess we're keeping the boring buttons. I finished up my work with some last fine tuning to the main menu, and that's all for today. I think it's time we rename the seeds. Much better. I also started some of the redesign process by making a separate menu for the radish shop, as well as deleting the pet shop in exchange for a new upgrade menu. I made a new radish shop simply by overlaying a texture button over the radish shop text. Clicking this button brings you to the new shop scene. I wanted to display data here so you can manage your resources, but there was just one problem. That being I had no clue how to update data from one scene to another. Eventually I got this to work by overlaying a massive texture button that once hovered over will act the same as clicking the load button. Moving your mouse in the scene will then load your data. That's the closest fix I could come up with, but there's probably a better solution. I also added a button that returns you back to the game scene. In total, this may not seem like a lot of work, but took a pretty large amount of time. Today we get the menu finished. I was able to start the base for the options button, but I didn't get completely started on that yet. I also created the illusion of automatic saving by calling a load function when the play button is pressed. This is opposed to the load button I had before. I also added a button that resets the player's progress, topped with some warning labels. I wanted to spice it up more than the wood I previously had, so I replaced the wood with a better looking sky. With this sky, I wanted there to be moving clouds. This was a good opportunity for me to learn about shaders. Now, I'm not going to get too far into detail about what that is, but Google explains it pretty well. This stuff was absolute buns to work with, but eventually I got a good looking cloud effect out of it. I did run into a problem where buttons couldn't be pressed underneath the shader, but Godot has a property that allows the mouse to completely ignore the clouds. This is what the menu is looking like. We're nearing the end of the week and the game still looks like doo-doo. Let's fix that. I got to work cooking up the main character in Microsoft Paint. This will be the beta mascot for the game. I also needed to work on a logo for the project, but you can't have a logo without a name. So for our beta name, we're gonna rock with Radish Retail. Photopea made the logo a breeze to make. Lastly, I finished up the game scene with new UI elements and a special moving background. This makes everything look a lot nicer. I ended the day off with correcting my purchasing script to make it more flexible when calculating math. This will allow me to create more buttons with varying prices. I also quickly went ahead and added some more purchase options. The current skill is 1 radish is worth 10 coins. Now we lock in. We're on the last day of the week, so of course I did the most today. So far I basically made a bare bones clicking sim, so I thought it was about time I add a unique spin to it. I created a new variable and called it value. Value will keep track of how many coins your radishes are worth. The more radishes you purchase, the higher your value. The entire project basically self-imploded when I tried adding this feature, but I'm gonna pretend that didn't happen and ignore the fact I spent way too much time fixing the problem. Shortly after, I implemented a sell button. This button resets both your radishes and value back to 0, then adds whatever your value was to your coin score. I was able to get the feature working, but I came to a realization. After you sell, when your value is added back to your coins, you're simply back to where you were before purchasing any radishes. This makes buying radishes completely pointless since you get the same effect as if you were to just have clicked for all your coins. To fix this, I added what's called the additional bonus. The additional bonus is simply an added value to your sold radishes. This bonus will change at random, meaning you need to sell when you believe the bonus is most profitable. Sometimes the bonus can be an additional 1,000 coins, but the other second it could drop down to an additional 5. This incentivizes the player to watch the additional bonus to choose when the best time to sell will be. When creating the bonus, I used a timer to generate a random number. This timer takes a total of 24 seconds to activate, since I plan on potentially adding days to the game. Each day, the bonus changes. There was just one problem. When starting a new game, the bonus would stay 0 until the 24-second timer was up. I fixed this by adding an initial timer that only fires once and generates an initial bonus after half a second. The initial bonus is much smaller, however, with a range of only 0 to 100. I was able to get the system up and running, but not long after I came across a new problem. When switching scenes to the radish shop, the bonus loaded in fine. The problem occurs when switching back to the main scene. The initial timer fires once again. We don't want this since we're trying to keep the bonus the same between the shop and game scenes. There's a setting for a timer to only fire once, but the setting resets each time you switch scenes. I added a fix by encoding a variable to the timer which is automatically set to 0. If it's anything else, the initial timer won't work again. Then in the script for loading data, when entering the shop scene, the so-called init timer will add 1 to its value. This way, once you return to the game scene, the variable will not be 0, meaning the initial timer will not fire and the bonus will stay the same. In theory, this should have worked first try, but it didn't. This took around 20 attempts of debugging before I gave up entirely. It wasn't until randomly trying once again later that the system worked correctly. For some reason, in my past attempts, the script refused to change the initial timer variable to anything other than 0. I have no idea why, but now it's working, so yeah. The way way I implemented this feature shows massive rookie footprints, so if there's a better way of doing this, please let me know. After getting through that, I also needed to quickly balance what I already had, since I found it way too easy to quickly earn massive amounts of coins. Since the value is just the same amount of money you spent, the additional bonus meant you always got a major profit, no matter what. To fix this, I changed the current value to be double how many radishes you had, as opposed to 10 times. This means you'll now be spending more money on radishes and getting less in return. This adds a greater reliance on the additional bonus. I also found that the bonus would often be too large, so I nerfed both the normal and initial bonuses and decreased the chance of getting a major profit right off the bat. In total, these changes made it significantly more difficult to earn any sort of profit from purchasing radishes. This is perfectly set up though, since I already have a planned upgrade shop that can help with this. For now, I plan on keeping the one-click, one-coin system, and upgrades being for the sole purpose of boosting value. This keeps the game from being a click-to-win experience, and instead a game involving the strategy of purchasing and selling radishes at the right time. With that, a complete week's worth of work is up, and it's time to review the project. Let's see what we got so far. Hey, this is me, and about a week ago I decided to become a game developer. Learning how to script in Godot, I got started on my first project. I documented the first week of my progress, and since then I further developed my ability of scripting. Anyways, this is Animal Crossing, a popular Nintendo franchise known for its cozy gameplay, but there's a genius addition that I especially admire about it: the turnip market. There's 3 common ways of gaining money in Animal Crossing, but there's also one more. On Sundays, turnips can be purchased at a random price, but there's a catch. These turnips have only a week before they rot and become worthless. Before then, you can sell your newly purchased turnips each day until the following Sunday, but unlike other items, you won't know what price they go for. This price varies each day. If prices are unfavorable, you may lose money on the turnips you originally purchased. However, you could also strike gold and make a huge profit. Essentially, a simplified stock market. Now, what would happen if we took this idea, expanded off it, and made it into its own video game? Well, I did just that. There's just one catch. I've never made a complete video game before, and I'm still new to Godot. Will this task even be possible? Come find out and join me on the second episode of my indie game devlog. This is the game from last week. So far the gameplay is looking pretty bare bones. You mainly click for coins. These coins are used for multiple purposes, but the one currently implemented is purchasing the main attraction, radishes. These radishes can be sold whenever, but you only ever earn the value of your radishes, which is determined by how many you own. Since the value is only double your radishes, you always sell at a loss. This is intentional, but I also added a random additional bonus, so the player could wait for a good time to sell if they wanted to make a profit without any upgrades. On paper this might not sound so bad, but gameplay wise, it's pretty rough. At this current state, all you need to do is spam click until the additional bonus skyrockets up. There's also no incentive for earning money and collecting more radishes. Basically, it's an unsatisfying waiting game before abusing the main feature with no payoff, so let's fix that. To begin, we're adding days. I've been wanting to start a day cycle for a while, but it's only now that I'm taking on the task of making it happen. Remember the turnip market? We'll be taking some inspiration from aspects such as selling, purchasing, and spoiling. Radishes selling and buying prices will now be determined at random each day. Radishes could be cheap and sell well one day, then pricey and sell poorly the next. If the selling price doesn't suit your fancy, you can hold your radishes. There's just one thing to keep in mind. Radishes will now spoil after 7 days, making them completely worthless. This forces the player to sell all their radishes before the week is up, even if it means selling at a loss. These tweaks plan to improve the game, however, there's still more changes that need to be made. Starters, the sell button has gotta go. Immediate selling is part of the reason the game felt so stale. Now you can put your radishes in the sell bucket, but you won't get anything until the day is actually over. I also need to somehow spice up clicking. Of course, special effects will come into play, but I also plan on adding XP that grows as you click, allowing the player to level up. Before we add these features, we gotta make some UI. Luckily, Photopea makes this a breeze. I was able to get the progress bar imported and working, but there was one problem. I couldn't scale the bar down. This appears to be a common issue with Godot. Luckily, by placing the bar into a node 2D, then scaling down the node, the bar scales down alongside it. Next, I placed a label to show the day, and we were finished with the progress bar. The next thing I wanted to do was spice up the sell button, so I cooked something up for that as well. I took a tin bucket and added some angel wings to it for some charm. charm. Then I made separate versions for some visual feedback, and that was that. This is the game from last week. So far the gameplay is looking pretty bare bones. You mainly click for coins. These turnips have only a week before they rot and become worthless. Before then, you can sell your newly purchased turnips each day. Radishes can be purchased at a random price, but unlike other items, you won't know what price they go for. This price varies each day. If prices are unfavorable, you may lose money on the turnips you originally purchased. Being Now that we got our UI laid out for us, today we give them functionality. I got the timer working, but as per usual I bumped into a problem. Unlike other issues that I was able to resolve, I never found out how to debug this one. I tried creating a tween so the daily timer would smoothly scroll as opposed to its chunky look. No matter what I tried, it never worked, so I'm guessing it must be something to do with my custom UI. Theoretically, I could attempt to make an animation for the bar myself, but more on that later. I guess we'll stick to this chunky style for now. I added the day counter to the radish shop that made a new scene that displays once the day is over. This is what I call the summary screen. The summary screen displays numerous stats and shows the total profit for the day before allowing the player to return. I also wanted to create a fade effect between scenes so the game would feel more polished. This was an opportunity for me to learn about animation in Godot. This was a super seamless process, and the animation editor made adding this feature a breeze. I went ahead and added this effect everywhere. Now I need to make the summary screen actually work. In order to do this, I need to implement the new selling system. Instead of selling by player value, we're going to be selling at a random value with the added bonus. To make this, I just made a new variable and applied it. I also quickly went in and changed how the sell button would work. I had to come up with a way of storing the data until the day summary screen popped up. I thought of using a table or something, but couldn't find out how, so I resorted to what I knew from before. I used the save and load functions to create a new folder on the person's computer. When the sell button is clicked, data is moved from the game to this new storing folder. Once the summary needs it, the folder is emptied and data returns back to the game, all to be displayed on the summary screen. Adding this without any issues was a great feeling. That's how you know I'm on my way to becoming a game developer. As much as I want to redesign the game's UI, I guess I should start with the boring stuff. Let's start by adding the random buying price. Currently the price is fixed at 10 coins, but we're changing that. I'd be lying if I said that going into the purchase script wasn't scary. I haven't touched the code for this thing in about 8 days, and a lot has changed in that time. Thankfully, the last time I was here I made a change that prepared me for the one I'm about to make. All that was required was to reassign the variable to a random number and apply that to the label. After a lot of tweaking, I got it working. While adding this, I realized there were several other changes I still need to make. One being the total profit. We basically just want the game to add up all the summary stats to show the player how much they made or lost that day. The math involved with calculating this, plus my horrible organizing skills, made this task brain-numbing. After some serious grinding, I got it working, but I also ended up fixing a bug where resetting progress breaks the random numbers. I quickly fixed this game-breaking glitch. After a mad amount of time, I got the main system working. Let's break it down. Here I started a new game. On day 0, I ended up getting unlucky as my buying price was really high and my selling price was really low. This means I need more coins to purchase a single radish, and when I sell it, I'll only get 5 additional coins for each radish sold. Luckily for me, my additional bonus wasn't too bad, so I get a little cushion. I placed my radishes into the bucket and waited for the day to end. The game calculated my profit and I received the coins. On the next day, luck was on my side as I got a low buying price, a high selling price, and a stupidly high additional bonus. That might need to get nerfed. With that, we have the main gameplay loop working. One currently unfixed bug is the day timer. When switching to the shop scene and back, this timer resets. That's something that needs to get fixed, but if you noticed any other bugs, please let me know. I think my brain needs a break for now. Now that we got the sell system working, let's work on some visual feedback. As the player stores more radishes in the sell bucket, I wanted to show that. To pull this off, I created a new global variable called sell texture. This is automatically set to 0, but matches how many radishes you sell. Using if statements, the sell button is now able to detect how many radishes are being stored. If the amount of radishes exceeds a specific amount, the sell bucket will run through a list of textures and apply the correct texture for the matching amount of radishes. This texture will save when switching scenes and resets when a new game is started or after a day is completed. This addition gives the player an idea of how many radishes they are selling that day. They will also see an exact number on the summary screen. Since I'm already working on the button, I quickly added a sound effect to it. While testing, I also found a bug where the next day would still remember the data from the previous day and load it in. Fixing this was a straightforward fix, but the math involved was draining for my singular brain cell. The amount of calculations only increases as the project gets bigger, meaning each system has to account for every other calculation. So despite this fix being straightforward, it took a lot out of me. This is also on me though. As I learn more about scripting, I'm starting to realize some mistakes I made. One example is the save and load functions, which are copy-pasted in every script they're needed in. This means a change in one script will require a change in all scripts. It would have been more efficient to create a separate script for these functions and make it globally available using Godot's auto-load feature. Realizing my mistakes only means I'm getting better, and I'm proud of the progress I've made so far. We're nearing the end of the week, so we gotta get some work done. You probably noticed the main menu is starting to get a bit cramped, so let's fix that. The first UI change is gonna be the switch from text to icons. This allows for more shops and a cleaner look. I then color-coded the buying and selling prices and put them closer to each other. One thing to note about selling, you only get the additional bonus if you sell at least one radish. Currently, the player wouldn't be able to tell, so to let them know, I made the label invisible and enabled its visibility once a radish was sold. After adding this, I came to another realization about the balance behind my game. I intended for there to be moments on the the player would need to sell at a loss. An example of this would be right before rotting period. I found that the additional bonus was good in losing situations, but most times was too overpowered. To nerf the additional bonus, I plan on making it into something that needs to be bought with coins. The player can decide whether or not they want to purchase the additional bonus upgrade. This will be sold at a fixed price and, if purchased, can help the player raise their profits. Right now I'm just theorizing a new system, but let me know if I should actually implement this. To finish the day off, I finalized the mascot so we can get rid of whatever this thing was. One last thing I wanted to pull off was to make the main logo bob up and down. I created a new animation, then called it in a script. After I got it working, I called it a day. Days 6 and 7 were spent entirely debugging. During these days, I was able to catch some prior oversights. One bug I caught was an oversight in how I manage data. Currently, I have two saving methods: saving and loading, and storing and dropping. Saving and loading are meant for the purpose of holding data for future playthroughs, while storing and dropping are used for the sell bucket and summary screens. One problem I faced when creating the summary screen was differentiating what was a sold radish and what was a held radish. Basically, if you purchase 2 radishes, sell 1, and the day finishes, the game will tell them apart and count only 1 as sold. The problem comes when returning to the game scene. I need that sold radish to be erased from the game's memory so it doesn't add on to the next day's summary. Another major problem was remembering held radishes after a day was over. Radishes get stored upon clicking the sell bucket. This data is dropped into the summary screen and displayed. After this, I wipe the data for what was sold so it doesn't carry over into another day. The problem came when remembering to keep the held radishes. A quick summary of my fix involved a new system that switches between both the saving and storing functions. When the sell bucket is pressed, data is stored to the store folder. These are remembered as a new variable, sell radishes. When the day comes to an end, whatever is in the player's inventory gets saved to a separate file. The stored file then drops everything out of it to be displayed, which gets calculated into the total profit. This total gets added to the current player's coin score. Then the store folder empties itself for the following day. The game then takes what was in the other folder and loads that into the game scene. You can tell I'm no mathematician nor skilled programmer, but this fix acts as a band-aid for a bigger issue for now. The only problem now is when the player doesn't sell, the summary screen doesn't know what to display and plays for empty data. This leaves it to display null. I believe with some more grinding I can get this fixed, but for now this isn't too big of a problem. There we have it, another week's worth of work as a new developer working on my first project. We've made some serious progress in the past couple weeks, so let's see the game so far. Hi, I'm Marbellos. Very recently I made my first game using Godot with 0 coding experience. I was able to construct a decent product, but it wasn't long until disaster struck. Similarly to most other indie games, I'm gonna need a reset. Everything. Unfortunately, it was too good to be true for me to watch a couple tutorials and reinvent the wheel with a unique game idea that functions without any issues. My game also just wasn't original enough to stand out. For a while, I was able to work with my spaghetti code, but sooner than later, the bad organization caught up to me, and adding additional content to my game was getting increasingly difficult. Although I could attempt to keep going, I think I'm better off rewriting everything for the long term and starting over at square one. With this opportunity of restarting, I think it'd be smart to approach the project with a more defined and sustainable plan. Using totally top secret game design documents, we'll be taking a look at the necessary elements to crafting an enjoyable game. We'll be taking these ancient elements and applying them as we recreate my project. In doing so, I'll be refining my game to create a better product overall. We got a lot of work ahead of us, so let's get started. One advantage of restarting is that I can now properly plan ahead of time. Previously, I worked in such a way that disregarded organization, planning, and game design entirely. It was stacking blocks without a solid basis. Now, I can plan ahead of time and avoid regrettable decisions from the past. This will include things not possible before, such as online functionality, mobile support, and further optimization. For example, let's start with the main menu first. Now that I get a second shot at things, I designed this one with a little more care. I tried branching away from the play, settings, and quit buttons as they make games look a bit less professional due to their heavy use. Instead of a single play button, I split it into two, a continue and a new game. I created a new system that checks if the player has played the game before. If not, the continue button will be grayed out. If they have, it won't. I integrated the moving background since it looks a lot nicer than the previous plain sky I had. The new coming soon button will be for online purposes if I decide to add that. I then added an animation to the logo and dropped the current version in there as well. With that, our main menu is successfully remastered. Let's get into the hard part. The core fundamentals of my game include the radish market, which involves random selling, buying, and bonus variables, as well as clicking. This brings up our first game design element. Sadly, clicking doesn't quite match this category, but we can fix that. Previously, the click button was a bland square, so I did a bit of fine-tuning to its design. Now the button is a lot more satisfying to click than before. As opposed to the labels that displayed stats from before, I'm going to use a more slick design that uses icons. I got the click button up and running, and now we got the basic clicking sim. To make clicking more engaging than before, I'm going to add XP this time around. As you click, XP will increase, allowing you to level up. For now, I just added a rough draft, but eventually I'll come back to add more depth to this feature. Now that we got clicking out of the way, let's move on to the big part, the radish market. I got to work to create the day system and random buying prices. Once a new day is started, a new buying price is generated. This price can be seen above the radish. Instead of being in a completely new scene, purchasing radishes is now more seamless, as all it takes is one click. So far, the project has required more debugging than before. It looks like progress is looking good though, since I don't have any random debugging reports, unlike the other version. The last mechanic we need to implement are the selling system, random selling price, and summary system. I got the selling price running without issues, and with a bit of grinding, got the selling system working as well. The one that took the most effort was the summary board. I created a new UI that resembled a bulletin board. At least that's what I was going for. Similarly to purchasing radishes, the summary screen will no longer be displayed on another scene. Now it'll pop up on top of the gameplay, making everything more seamless. One change I plan to make to the summary is a grade system that will rate your performance. More on that later. Now that we have our mechanics finished, we can give ourselves a grade for this category. In terms of mechanics, we have everything. Now, whether or not they're engaging is another story. Rushing to purchase radishes to make a profit before the day is over is engaging enough for what we're looking for. The problem is when the player decides to hold their radishes. This leaves some days to become boring click grinds since there's not much else to do. Eventually, we'll aim to address this issue with the addition of various items and upgrades in the shop. Whether or not I should implement a minigame or something is up to you guys. For now, let's grade ourselves on the topic. I'd say a B+ is fair for what we have currently. Let's move on to the next game design element. Now that we got the main system working, it's time to tackle the next challenge. Gameplay is by far one of the most important game design elements when it comes to making your own game. Without compelling gameplay, you'll likely suffer a lack of engagement, retention, and overall enjoyment. Earlier, I brought up the new XP bar idea and even made a prototype for it. This is going to be the first of many steps to making the game more compelling. Currently, all that's available in the shop are radishes. Adding more options seems like the most reasonable next step. One interesting feature I thought of adding would be farm spaces. If you decide to purchase a farm space, you'll be able to grow a radish yourself instead of needing to purchase one. These farm spaces can be stacked to grow multiple radishes. Of course, balancing will be a necessary issue to tackle, but this could spice up the gameplay quite a bit. Other options would include employees, a profit bonus, and a skip day button. On top of those, I'll also be adding a weekly quota. This quota is the amount of money you're required to make at the end of 7 days. Failing to reach the quota will result in either a game over or whatever else you guys want to see. Another feature we need is an end goal. I plan on making a buyable statue that costs a stupid amount of money. This statue will be displayed on the screen and can be upgraded up to a gold status. Although minimal, I think these additions will be enough to create compelling gameplay in radish retail. Now let's get to work adding some functionality to these ideas. The first thing I got to work on was the quota. Currently, there's no real point to growing richer, but you'll also grow rich infinitely as long as you sell at the right time. The first step to fixing this issue will be the quota, which is meant as a required expense at the end of each week. With some quick coding, I was able to get this implemented. I recycled my function for the summary board and used it to create the week over screen, which gets displayed at the end of 7 days. I made a new week over variable that is automatically set to 7. Each time a cycle of 7 days is completed, the week over variable will add 7 to itself. This lets the game know when to display once the week is over, since it will only show once the day variable matches with the week over variable. After that, I simply display the difference after the quota is subtracted from the coins. The quota can be seen at all times under the day bar. With that, the quota is completed. Now let's get to work on the shop. The first thing I got to work on was the buyable profit increase. This is what was before the additional bonus. Since this grants the player a profit bonus, I plan on making the price for this random. Doing this makes buying the bonus a gamble, since you could spend more on it than what you receive. After some work, I got this working as intended. It even saves when you exit out of the game. Isn't that cool? Alright, we have one down. For video length purposes, I won't be working on the rest right now. Their functions have already been planned out, so all I need to do is get them working. Let's grade ourselves on this topic. I'd say about a C is good considering we don't fully have the shop working yet. Let's continue. As you play a game, you are progressing. Whether it be through a fuller inventory, a higher rank, or a higher skill level, progression is key to showing the player they aren't wasting their time with your game. To show progression in Radish Retail, I'll be implementing a new rank system which is tied to your earnings. As you earn more money, your rank will increase. For balance purposes, I'll be adding a cap to how many radishes you can purchase in a single day. If you want to buy more, you can raise the cap through ranking up. These are the currently planned ranks. I also have a level up system tied to clicking. As you click, XP will increase. Gathering enough levels will allow you to unlock more features. Since I have the XP bar working, all I needed to do was integrate the rank system and radish cap. These were fairly easy. I started by creating a new global variable that tracks how much money you make. This number won't reset and instead continues to add to your total. Once this number exceeds a specific benchmark, a new rank will be unlocked and displayed. I also created a global variable that keeps count of your cap. This cap is automatically set to 5, but can be increased through ranking up. I was able to set these functions up with a fairly easy process. I also wanted to display the amount of radishes you buy until the cap is reached. I added a label that displays your bought radishes out of the daily cap. As you buy radishes, this number will increase until eventually hitting its max, where you can no longer purchase radishes that day. The visual feedback makes the system a lot more clear. Additionally, labels will be displayed upon ranking up, showing you what you've achieved. Currently, it displays the rank up itself, plus your cap increase. This is another layer of feedback to nail down how the system works to the player. Now, the player has their own rank and radish cap that will grow as they play. XP and levels will continue to increase for as long as the player continues to click. With that, we got progression and growth covered. I'll give us a B- for this one, as there's still some work to do. We've come a long way in recreating my entire game from the ground up. Now it's time to get to the untouched territory of my project. Immersion in video games is essentially a sense of involvement that gives the player a presence in the game. Achieving immersion can be done through a number of ways, but the methods we'll be using are through tutorials, cutscenes, and sound and music design. One thing we need is some sound design. Making sure the music matches the targeted atmosphere is harder than it seems. This is also the case with sound effects, easily one of the more underrated aspects of video games. Luckily for me, reused sound effects and music can easily be found on opengameart.com. Since I don't have the nearest clue on what it takes to create music on my own, I'm just gonna take that, and there we go. Now the game feels a lot more lively with the newly added music and sound effects. With the newly added sound design, the player should feel further immersed into the experience. There are still steps we need to take, such as adding a tutorial and creating cutscenes, but for length purposes, those will be featured in their own videos. Other than that, getting immersed into a game like Radish Retail relies more heavily on the game mechanics than an in-depth story with world building, especially since the game takes place almost entirely in one scene. With that, immersion is off the checklist. I'll give ourselves a B in this aspect, since I still need some time to cook more mechanics for the game. With that, we conclude our fixer-upper for Radish Retail. Just 10 minutes ago, we had to delete everything and reset back to square one, but since then we've rebuilt and improved the game beyond anything it was before. In the process, we've also fleshed out the core mechanics of the game and constructed a solid coding base that'll allow us to continuously add updates. Further optimization and planning have also been accomplished. Let's take one last look at the current gameplay. Hi, I'm Marbellos, a little fellow working on a project I like to call a procedurally generated dynamic economy for buying and selling radishes simulator. Essentially a watered down stock market, kind of like the one in Animal Crossing. I started work on my project not that long ago, as a way to teach myself scripting so I could one day become a game developer. There's just one slight issue. My game doesn't really stand out. I've taken a few steps to build up an identity for my project, but we're gonna need more. We need to double down on some unique game mechanics that no game before has ever implemented. So today we're adding mining to the game. Well, that's not all. I've cooked up some sick mechanics that'll help improve the game significantly, but more on that later. Right now, gaining money is simply achieved by clicking a button. This grants the player their coin immediately, which is supposed to go into the radish market. This creates a blend between a clicking and economy simulator. The issue here is it's just plain boring. Over time, the gameplay devolves into fighting the urge to turn on an auto clicker. As you progress through clicking sims, you'll find that prices start to go up exponentially, requiring the player to invest in clicking multipliers and upgrades. This eventually turns into managing quadrillions of currency. This just isn't what we're going for. Although clicking is a way of gathering currency, we want most of our profits to come from buying and selling radishes at the right time. That brings us to where we are now. One comment suggested adding some variety to the gameplay by introducing animations or events to each mechanic. Today I delete the clicking part of my game and exchange it for the newly improvised mining system. Here's the plan. First order of business is a screen overhaul. We're gonna need a lot of room for what I plan on adding, and since space is starting to fill up, we gotta start condensing some of our elements. I moved all of the currency UIs to the left of the screen and shrunk the kinda oversized experience bar. I also scripted a function into the shop label that hides all of its components upon being clicked. This left me room to add the mining space. I quickly cooked up 3 beta textures for different ranks of ores. Each time you break an ore, a new one will drop for you to mine. It will be random between what kind will drop. Coins you earn from each rock will also be random from a fixed range, depending on what type of ore it is. Now it's time we get the click button hooked up to the mining system. When the player starts up the game, a new random number will be generated. This number will decide which rock will show up. With some short scripting, I got this running. I then created a new variable that represented the rock's health. This health is equal to the clicks it'll take for the rock to break. This number will change according to the type of ore that gets displayed. I then rewired the click button so it would subtract from the ore's health before rewarding a random amount of coins. Now that the amount of coins you earn is random, I also added a new label that displays how many coins you get from mining the ore. I also created new textures for the ores once they get hit, and created a script that makes it look like the ore is getting mined. Well, sort of. I went ahead and found some new sound effects to create further depth, and now I officially have a mining structure to work off of. I may have kind of done it in the least efficient way possible, but that's something future me gets to worry about. With this new mining system, you now rack up a lot more coins than before. This is better in the sense that we can now gain more coins than simply sitting there and clicking, but there's still one issue to tackle, that being AFK auto-clicking. No matter what, players will find a way to automate the clicking process. That's fine by me, but we need to implement a way to control it so players don't manipulate the core gameplay by going AFK. Since our game's prices won't be exponentially increasing, it can be a big problem if the player starts quickly gaining thousands of coins, since this will devalue the purpose of buying and selling radishes. Although there's a number of solutions to this issue, I tried finding the most creative fix. One idea was to create a punishment for clicking too fast for long periods of time. One way I could add this is through a durability system. As the player clicks, their mining durability will decrease. Repairing durability can simply be done by purchasing a repair in the shop. This way we can allow players to play without too much of a chore, while also preventing any AFK farms. The other fix to this problem is adding random economic events. These events will pop up randomly throughout the day and will require a small fee to be paid. This also links to another addition, that being debt. If the player is unable to pay with their pocket money, they will need to go into debt. This debt will be tracked and paid off at the end of the week if possible. If the debt remains after a couple of weeks, the player gets a game over. Adding these changes still allows the player to auto-click if they really want to speed up the earning process, but will require the player to be more attentive to the gameplay instead of leaving an auto-clicker on and leaving the game. To create the durability, I created 2 new icons. The bar will display durability and will decrease accordingly. The shield icon will be a buyable item in the shop that will refill the durability bar. Scripting these into the game was a straightforward process. Now that we have the system working, let's spice up the visuals. This was my first time learning how particles worked in Godot, and I'm not joking when I say I had a hard time grasping how it worked. Numerous tutorials, documents, and hours later, I decided to put it all down and try learning things myself. Godot has 2 types of particle emitters, one type that runs on the CPU and one that runs on the GPU. The CPU emitter is obviously a lot weaker, but it appears a lot more straightforward to use. Since I wasn't planning on featuring thousands of particles, I settled on the CPU emitter and got an effect up. The problem came when trying to call the effect. No tutorial was able to help my issue, so I scrapped the particle and its unique scene entirely. I started over on my game scene, this time with the GPU emitter. I was able to find out how it worked, recreating my particle and script together, and got it working. Just like that. Since I did this myself, this is probably not considered a recommended way of spawning particles, but we got it running, so that's all that matters. The next task I got to tackle was an animation for the rock when it spawns in. I brainstormed some ideas, but eventually settled with a falling animation. Setting this up was fairly straightforward since I have experience with the Godot animation editor. With that, we now have mining completely in the game. Since the start of this video, we got the mining system up and running, a durability system to coincide with the mining, as well as a new spawn animation and breaking effect. I put my blood, sweat, and tears into getting this all set up, but hopefully this helps combat the stagnant feeling that my game has right now. As I continue development, I plan on adding more additions that make the game feel more alive. Alright, let's move on to some other necessary additions to the game, one of which being the rest of the shop. Making the shop fully functional will add depth to the experience and make the game feel more finished. Before we get started on the shop though, we gotta flesh out our menu. Currently all we have is a button that returns the player back to the home screen. We're gonna make a new menu that will have more options, settings, and configurations than a simple return to menu button. I started work by creating a new UI for the shop background as well as new buttons. I played around with the placement and animation and eventually eventually landed on something good, at least for what we're looking for. Now, pressing the escape or tab keys will activate the new menu. Making these buttons work will be a lengthy task to overcome. So let's start light and work on the return and info buttons. These are pretty self-explanatory. The info button will present the player with, well, information. This will come in handy in case they forget how something works. The home button will work the same as the current return button I have now. This button will be for configuring settings, mostly sound effects, and these two, well, you'll have to wait and see. After getting the menu working, I got in a bit of playtesting and decided to make a change. I decided being able to sell on the same day made the gameplay kinda stale, since it didn't warrant any sort of risk when buying radishes. If the selling price was higher than the buying price, then why not buy the radishes, even if they're kind of expensive? I altered the game script to detect if any radishes were purchased. If so, the sell bucket will not be taking any radishes that day. The next day, you'll be able to sell, only if you don't decide to purchase radishes that day as well. This will add some risk to buying radishes since you won't know when you can make a profit. I also added a cap to how many radishes you can hold. Earlier, I added a cap to how many radishes you could purchase in a day. I also plan on adding a holding cap. Now the player will only be able to hold up to 8 radishes at any time, but this number can be upgraded in the shop. This will help balance the early game, but for now these numbers are placeholders and could be altered in the future. With that, we now officially have mining and radish retail, as well as some other helpful features and additions. This update will bring us a long way to the completion of the game, so I'm happy with what we got done. As per always, let's take a look at the gameplay for the game before we wrap things up. Hi, I'm Marbellos, and this is my first game, Radish Retail. I started this project at the start of June, and somehow summer is already over, and school is back in season. This change will take a big hit on the project, and I think it's about time I lock in and grind out the rest of what I planned for the game. But what else do we need to do? To keep myself on track, I made a list of everything that needs to get in the game, alongside some optional stuff that enhance the experience, like you. If you want to be featured in my small indie project as a character or cameo, leave a comment down below with a nickname and animal of your choice. Anyone who does this will get in. Now, in only 24 hours, I need to check everything off of this list, or else my game risks the chance of entering development hell. Once I get the core elements fully added, I'll be able to finally put in numerous additions that I've been waiting for. We can't do that without finishing strong though. With the timer started and the list written, let's get into it.
Please like and subscribe.
First order of business, I gotta finish the shop. I think I've spent enough time beating around the bush when it comes to finishing this thing. Its only current purpose is to look pretty, so let's add some functionality to it. Before doing so, let's pack this thing with some more content. I quickly drafted up some ideas and here's what I landed with. This is the business upgrade. When purchased, the cost for radishes will go up and money will be easier to obtain. These purchases can be stacked and will allow the player to raise their profits, but in turn will require them to handle higher amounts of currency. Another addition will be the gift. This links to something I'll add later, so stay tuned. Alongside those, I'm also adding the bomb. If purchased, the mining process will automate itself, and every 3 seconds, a bomb will do damage to the current ore. I think that's enough additions for now. If we want to finish the shop, one thing we need to do is create an inventory. I created a new folder that will manage how much of each item the player has. For the player to see and manage their inventory, I created a dedicated tab in the menu. I made it so the player's inventory is tracked by text labels. Here they can sell some assets if they feel they have too much. This management is meant to personalize the experience, since you get to choose which and how many upgrades will get you to your goal. With the inventory set up, let's get to work and add some functionality to each purchase. I've already gone ahead and added a cost for each item in the shop. These are subject to change as needed, but will help me test balancing and game pacing. I started off on the easier side of things and got the skip day purchase done first. This one is self-explanatory and was easy to script in. That actually goes to say for all of these, since all I'm doing is reducing the player's coins and adding the value to the inventory. Now it's time for the hard part, and that's allowing the player to see what each upgrade is doing and actually allowing them to manage the properties of each one. This is what the manage side of our inventory tab will be for. Let's start work on the farm plots. I dreaded even the thought of beginning work on this one, but it's time I get it finished. Originally, I planned to have a timer that would grant the player money every time it reached 0, but for scripting purposes, I simplified its design. Now, the farm plot will have a new value for the amount of money it will generate. On startup, this will be something low like 10 coins. As you purchase more employees, this generated number will increase. You'll get granted this money at the end of each day. With this system, I don't have to deal with the annoying timer and can get this added to the game faster. The only real complicated part of this process was calculating and presenting the earned profit at the end of the day. But I was so locked in, I was able to get this added in one sitting. It wasn't without its challenges though. Now that we've finished that, I say we take a quick break from the shop and move on to the next big thing. In order for a game's core gameplay loop to be completed, it must have these 5 things: an action, a challenge, a reward, feedback, and lastly, a return to the initial state. Most games handle handle the return with a game over screen. I set up the game so that a game over screen will be the most reasonable way to restart the gameplay loop, though I don't want a game over to occur too soon. As a solution, I've designed 2 new features with the point of solving this. One will be the debt system, and the other will be a play length toggle. Before starting a new game, the player can choose how long they want to go for. This will be counted in in-game days. If the player is able to make it to the finishing day with their quota and debts all paid off, they will win. If not, they lose and can restart. Even upon winning, I plan to allow the player to keep playing on their save file if they want to. This is also optimal for people who have cooked attention spans. This way, they can choose to play only a quick match if they want to. In order to implement this, we gotta get both a winning screen and losing screen designed. I started with the game over on a new scene. This is just a beta design, so don't expect it to look great. While I was working on the menu, I realized I never added a high score system, so I'll add that to the to-do list. Spoiler alert, I never got to this. I'm kinda starting to feel that developer burnout, so I think it's time I take my first break. I think I'm off to a good start, so a break shouldn't be that bad. So I might have just spent half the day away from my computer. I got distracted and caught up in a lot of other things, so now I just lost half a day's worth of work. If I want to finish my game, I'm gonna need to re-lock in and grind out these updates. Hopping back in, let's start work on the time toggle feature. I made a new menu so the player could select a limit for their save file when creating a new game. Through some simple scripting, I got this into the game. I somehow did this in the least efficient way possible, but all that matters is that it works. While adding this, I kept making tweaks to the design until I landed on something that I was fine with. Since I spent a while on the design, I started having second thoughts on whether or not this was an addition even worth adding to the game. Who would make players choose a time limit on a game they've never played before? What if someone gets invested into their save file only for it to be wiped since they chose a shorter time limit? These are questions that made me consider changing this to a game mode feature, but I don't have any other game mode to offer. For now, I'll keep it as it is, but I definitely plan on changing something here before the final release. If you have an idea, drop a comment. One change I need to make is the debug menu button. Since we already have a fleshed out menu, this isn't needed anymore. I replaced it with a button that brings up the menu in case someone isn't aware of the tab and escape keybinds. With that quick nitpick fixed, it's time we work on some bigger things, especially since we're running low on time. 2 things I've always wanted to add were random economic events and a savings account. Since we're running low on time, let's start on the easier of the 2 and get a savings account added. With the savings account, players will be able to store their money without worrying about potentially losing it. Creating the UI for this system was pretty straightforward, but it did come with its fair share of debugging. A lot of mistakes that slipped through the cracks were solved, and a lot of uncaught bugs were dealt with. In terms of actually making the savings account work, here's what I did. I added a new control node to the menu. As a subchild, I added a line edit node. I then attached a script to the control node since I need to create a filter for what goes into this text box. Here I tried scripting a quick filter that would only allow positive numbers to be typed in, but after a few attempts, I couldn't get this to work. After looking at the documentation, I discovered what a spin box was. This was essentially the same thing, but off the get-go only allowed numbers to be typed in. As a trade, the spin box doesn't allow for as much text customization, but luckily we don't really need that. My next challenge to overcome was updating the text to display whatever the player would type. I did this by simply dragging the value change signal from the node viewpoint and updating the text within the function. Next order of business is a confirm button and a separate file that will hold this information. I simply reused some of my old script to get this up and running, and with a bit of testing, I was able to get the saving done properly. We officially now have a savings account worked into the game, so we can check that off our list. At this point, I started to cut corners on features that were going to make it into the game, since my 24-hour mark was going to be a lot harder to hit than I thought. Anyways, what better time to take a break than now? Maybe staying at a computer all day isn't my thing. Let's lock in. I think it's time we finally get debt added. If the player is unable to make a purchase using their pocket money or savings, they can still make purchases, but this will put them into debt. Holding debt for too long results in a game over. I created a new global variable and added a check to every purchase. If no other payment method is available, a pop-up will ask if the player wants to purchase and go into debt. Adding this was a heftier task than I imagined, but with some grinding we got it in. While testing my debt system, I also found a flaw with my savings system that required me to rewrite how saving data is managed. I created a new workaround that will hopefully fix any issues. Okay, we've got a lot done, but there's still a lot left to do, and we're already almost out on time. Now I can see why games are always getting delayed. It takes a real grind to keep pushing out these additions without getting developer burnout. Luckily, my game is a small project. Even though I haven't ticked everything off the list, we still have a good amount of content to show for a beta version of the build. I've actually managed to create something that I often caught myself playing for the fun of it in the process, so I count that as a win. As more additions continue continue to be added, I think I'll have a good game in my hands and a finished project under my belt. Well, with that, the timer is now up. Here's everything I was able to add to my project in 24 hours. First, I was able to finish the shop and get the inventory system completed. I was also able to lay out the pre-design for the game over skits in design. Then I added a time length toggle at the start of a new game, allowing players to choose the length of their save files. After that, I added an ATM that allows the player to store and manage their money. I also finally added the debt system, allowing players to make expensive purchases without needing to worry about how much money they currently have. For ease of access, I also revamped the menu button. Lastly, I rewrote my entire saving system, as well as patched out various bugs and glitches. That about wraps up everything I was able to achieve in a day's worth of work. Only 3 months ago, I didn't understand a lick of programming, but with some grinding, I'm now able to bring my creations to life. As per always, let's take one last look at the game.